Happy Pentecost Sunday. You guys can take a seat. You guys can take a seat. You know, we could go a lot of ways today in this morning. Welcome to Kingdom Culture. If you're new with us, we're excited that you're with us. Hope that you can connect with us post-experience. Like Matt referenced, connect groups key. Community is key, isn't it? Yeah. Like relationship does not just happen without being in an environment where relationship can happen, right? Yeah. Sometimes we need facilitated environments to help promote relationship, because some of us have a harder time, let's just be honest, developing relationship. How many know somebody who has a hard time developing relationship? We all do. Maybe we're the ones that have a hard time. I know that every one of us are on a journey, but listen, if you don't have relationship, you're only living a fraction of the spiritual life that you could be living right now. Oh, it's silent in here. Is anybody awake? Don, are you awake? You better be the loudest person. You're in the front row. Matt, are you awake? Of course. Matt was at my house until like, what, 12:30 a.m. or 12 a.m. last night? Got up at what time this morning? 3:45. So you got home at what time? At 1. And you got up at 3:45. So if he's awake, I expect all of you to be awake. Awesome. We are in this series called How many of you have been enjoying Scandalous? It's been scandalous. And I noticed some of the numbers had gone down after I preached one of the messages. But it's been great. Actually, it's been one of my favorite series of this year. And I've said over and over again, I think it's the most important series for the year, the entire year, hands down, as far as the foundation. And it's very easy for us to go through our spiritual life without really having the proper foundation. You know, we build, it falls down. We build, it falls down. You wonder why you're up and you're down, you're up and you're down, you're all around, and you're kind of like all over the map, and you're never really consistent. It's because you don't have a proper foundation. When you build proper foundation, you can build the structure really high, and it will not fall down. When it's built on the rock, it's built on the right foundation. And so we've been building this foundation deep in this series, and I want to keep going with it. I feel like there's probably... this is probably the second last week of the series. This series I've been really open because I feel like there's some stuff that I feel like the Holy Spirit wants to address and keep working on us every week in. And if you haven't, watched the podcasts, or if you haven't been able to follow up, I encourage you, go to YouTube and watch the previous last 7 weeks. I know it will really encourage you, and it will always give you more context to what I'm talking about now if you're up to speed. And so I'd encourage you, subscribe to our YouTube channel and keep posted. But I want to say this: when you're offended, everyone say offended, because this is sort of the foundation of the entire series. 1 Corinthians 1 verse 23, Paul said to the church at Corinth, he said, listen, guys, this revelation of Jesus that we're preaching, this message of the cross that we're preaching, it will be an offense. It will be an offense to the Jews, and it will sound moronic or foolishness to everybody else. That's what he was saying. It's an offense. That word offense, we've said it over and over again, really is the Greek word that the Greek word where we get our English term scandalous from, and it actually means the bait stick of a trap, to be trapped in something where there's a snare set up that could cause you to stumble. And I've said this, and I said this into our team rally 2 weeks ago, and I spoke a little bit of an encouraging message to our team and said, listen, an offense can either trap you or it can train you. For the Jews, it trapped them because they couldn't get past the religious order that had been established. They couldn't see that Jesus was the fulfillment of that religious order, and that he came to give them a promotion. That religious order was coming to an end, that there was a better covenant being introduced through the person of Jesus. They couldn't see it, so it was an offense to them, and so Jesus was that trap to them. He was that rock that caused them to stumble. To everybody else, it was just foolish because, I mean, how does a man die and then resurrect? Why would he, he's a sinless man, supposedly, born of a virgin, and why would he take upon the sin of humanity willingly? Why didn't he say anything? Why did he go on the cross? Why did he die willingly? Why did resurrection, 3 days, that doesn't make any sense. They couldn't rationalize it. To everybody else, it was just foolishness. But we've been exploring this whole idea of the gospel being scandalous in that when we understand who he is, we are living constantly in a place of offense without knowing it, because the message is offensive. The message is offensive to all of the little Pharisee inside of us, because everyone of us in this room has a little bit of Pharisee. A Pharisee there was 2 types of religious sects in society at the time of Jesus. The main 2 were Pharisees and Sadducees. Because when you're super religious, you're sad, you see. No, but the Pharisees, really, they were the majors on all the outside. They focused on all the outside, the behavior, on the appearance, on the routine, on what they did. They majored on the outside, but Jesus came to say, listen, I want to major on the inside now. And you can do all the right things on the outside, but those are the elementary things. I want you to focus on the inside. So I'm introducing a new way. I'm introducing a new path. And so all of us in this room, my prayer is that all of us today get a pharisectomy. Sorry. There's a book on my side table in my living room that's titled Pharisectomy. So I see it every day. And so how many want a pharisectomy? Yeah, come on, you need to. Anyways, now you're all offended. But we're talking about offense, so it's okay. But when you're offended, it's always usually our first response to feel like when we're offended. What are the first 3 letters of offense? Off. Isn't it interesting? When my wife offends me, usually my first reaction is, you're off. Anybody ever feel that way? Come on, in a marriage, right? When something offends you, usually you're not like, oh, you're always right 100% of the time. You're not thinking right away, right? You're thinking, I'm offended, you're bothering me, so you must be off. That's our first response, right? Really. And we have to go through a process to realize that sometimes we're the ones that are off. It's not that Michelle is off, although sometimes she is really off. But I have to work through a process where maybe I'm the one who's off. Yeah. And that's what the gospel is like. The gospel's always challenging the way that we think in every scenario. Always challenging the way that we think. I want to pick it up in John 6. Let's go to John 6. I've been meditating on this passage, and I'm going to do my best to extract some truth for you this morning. I'm going to go a little bit of a different route than I've been going the last few weeks. And it's a little bit of a longer message, so I might not get through all of it, so I might do part 2 next week, who knows, so just track with me a little bit. And I'm going to give you some context to this passage, because it's a really long passage, one of the longest passages, in fact. There's 71 verses in this chapter. I'm not going to read all 71, because you'd all be asleep, and then I would fall asleep because I'm watching you fall asleep, so I don't want to do that. But I do want to give you a little bit of context, because I've been, over the last 2 to 3 weeks, I have been, for some reason, going back to this chapter over and over again. And so I want to pick it up in verse 58 in John. So Jesus was in Capernaum and was teaching in the synagogue at this point, and we see in verse 58, let's go to 58. I was going to read from 22 to 71, but like I said, I want you to fall asleep. So I'm going to read from 58, and then I'm going to kind of backtrack a little bit, and so track with me, okay? You ready? Yeah. Verse 58, chapter 6, the Gospel of John. Everyone say, I am. This is Jesus speaking. I am the true bread that came down from heaven. Now, I want to stop there for a second, because if you read this in context, you always, like I've been saying over and over again, you cannot isolate Scripture. When you read and study the Scripture, the Word, you're going to get really screwed up, really off if you just isolate one verse here, one verse there, one verse over here. Like, oh, this is what Jesus says. Like, I always use this. Like, when Paul says, Jesus will never give you more than you can handle. And they always use that to back up why they shouldn't do things, whatever. But that's actually totally misused, out of context. He was talking about temptation. He will absolutely always give you more than you can handle in life, so that his strength can prove real in your life, not your own. He will always overwhelm you, always put more than you can handle on your plate in life, so that his strength can shine, not your own. We'll always use scriptures like that to testify why they don't do things, whatever. No, that's not how it works, okay? You can't isolate. It's talking about temptation. So, like I'm saying here, you cannot isolate one verse. You have to read things in context. And so when he says, I am the true bread of heaven, we got to understand that even in the beginning of this passage, he's about to feed 5,000 people with a little boy's lunch. They have no bread. And so he's in this state, he's in a context of representing this whole thing about bread and provision. And he kind of opens this whole thing up, this whole passage up with this experience where there's 5,000 people and their families. Let's say there's 10,000, 12,000 people. People don't realize that it was only the men they counted. So there's probably like 10,000 people. And they come to Jesus, and Jesus asks one of his disciples, say, hey, what would it cost to go get some bread for these guys? And the disciple says to them, well, Jesus, it'd be kind of impossible. We'd have to work it'd be like so much of our, like a full year's salary just to, pay off the bread that it would require to feed all these people. But Jesus knew what he was going to do before he even asked the question to his disciple. He was just kind of seeing where they were at. He's kind of seeing, where, kind of preparing, priming the pump, getting them ready, because he knew he was going to feed them supernaturally with a little boy's lunch. He was going to multiply it. So they have this experience of 5,000 people plus experiencing full provision, more than enough bread, more than enough fish, and then he starts to teach them a little bit. Teach them about who he is. You guys, what I did is just simply a representation of who I am. Now I'm going to bring you along a journey where I'm going to introduce myself to you at a deeper level. I'm going to give you an opportunity in this next season to now see me for who I really am. You saw what I've done. You've seen my works. Now I want you to see why I do those works. Let me introduce to you who I really am. Verse 58, so I am the true bread that came down from heaven. I am the true bread that came down from heaven. You just had some bread from a little boy's lunch multiplied. But now, see, every parable, a third of Jesus' teachings were parables. So what a parable is something that's natural, a story that's natural, used to relay spiritual principles to people, to help them have context and understand. Because the Hebraic way of thinking was circular. It wasn't linear. Where Greeks was like 1 + 1 = 2. Everything had to kind of make sense. But the Hebraic way of thinking was everything was kind of in a circle, and they drew pictures. That's why every Hebrew letter actually means more than one thing, and it has a picture attached to it. So when you look at the Hebrew language, every letter is a picture of something that means multiple things. So that whole world, so he's just gave them a whole bunch of bread. Now he's saying, listen guys, that was just a representation of who I am. Now let me introduce to you the opportunity for you to come in a little bit closer to the who I am. I am the true bread that came down from heaven. Anyone who eats this bread will not die as your ancestors did, even though they ate the manna. But we will live, or they will live forever. Verse 59, because in the Old Covenant, in the Old Testament, when they were in the wilderness, God fed them supernaturally with what was called manna, which literally means, what is it? Because no one knew what it was. It was these flakes that appeared on the ground, supernatural provision. And they called it manna because it was like, what is it? And what is it means manna. So they're like, what is it? This is what we're eating. It is what it is. We're eating, what is it? It is what it is. I don't know what it is, so I'm calling it, what is it? That's what it was called. Okay? Verse 59, he said these things while he was teaching in the synagogue in Capernaum. Many of his disciples said, this is very hard to understand. Have you ever been in a situation where something that was said to you was hard to understand? Absolutely, right? That was my high school. How can anyone accept it? Verse 61, Jesus was aware that his disciples were complaining. So he said to them, does this offend you? Does this offend you? Is this scandalizing you? Is this too scandalous, what I'm saying? I mean, you've been with me for a little bit now. Is this too much for you to understand? I'm relating the who I am with what I just did. Everything I do is a reflection to put my seat deeper in your life, to give you a revelation of who I am. So I'm trying to give you an opportunity to come a little bit closer, 62. Then what will you think if you can't believe this, that I am the true bread from heaven? If you can't believe this, if I am the provision from heaven to this earth, if you can't believe this, then what are you going to think if you see the Son of Man ascend to heaven again? Verse 63, the Spirit alone gives eternal life. Human effort accomplishes nothing. And the very words I have spoken to you are spirit and life. But some of you do not believe me. I love this. For Jesus knew from the beginning which ones didn't believe, and he knew who would betray him. Interesting point that Jesus will even do things and pick things in your life that will intentionally not work out to make you a better person. I'm not saying he will punish you. I'm not saying he's a bad father and he does things to punish you. But there are things that are setups in your life that look like setbacks that are actually to empower you to move forward. If you can perceive them right. You know, they feel like setbacks. They feel like failures. But how many know that a seed has to become a failure in the ground before it grows into a tree? The seed has to fail being a seed. Right? Before it can produce what it's destined to produce. Sometimes your greatest failures in life are seeds deposited in the soil of your life that are literally the beginning or the introduction to your next promotion. Some of the greatest things you will live and experience in life will come as a result of what felt in seasons like failure. I don't think you heard that. Some of the greatest successes, promotions in life will feel, if you look back on them, you will be able to see that that is a result of that one season or that thing that died in me, that thing that I thought I failed at, I thought it was over. That is the result of that failure in that last season. Because a seed has to fail being a seed before it can become a fruitful tree. Some of you don't believe me, for Jesus knew from the beginning which ones didn't believe, and he knew who would betray him. Then he said, that is why I said that people can't come to me unless the Father gives them to me. Verse 66, at this point, many of his disciples turned away and deserted him. Interesting, isn't it? Like, how quick people are to let offense rob them of the moment. I look at myself and I'm like, it's interesting how quick I am in marriage sometimes to be offended at something. Sorry, I'm using the marriage analogy because, I mean, you live together all the time. There's opportunity for offense all the time, right? Anybody with me here? Or your all marriages are all perfect? I mean, we're pretty perfect. Not really, but you know what I mean. And so I'm like, I think about myself and, man, it's so easy for me to just want to, like, disconnect when I get offended because my pride is shaken, right? The first reaction is you're off and I'm out, you know, in a sense, in my mind. Jesus said to the 12, are you also going to leave? Verse 67, Simon Peter replied, Lord, to whom would we go? You have the words that give eternal life. We believe and we know you are the Holy One of God. Then Jesus said, I chose the 12 of you, but one is a devil. Man, that's like shocking, isn't it? Imagine that. Just imagine being in this situation. It's like, you know, let's say we're with our team and, you know, we chose the 12 of you. And one of you in this row is a devil. You'd be pointing to the guy beside you. It's definitely not me, you know. One of you is a devil. But this was to fulfill prophecy because someone in his inner circle had to sell him out so that it would initiate the cross. It's all part of fulfilled prophecy. It was prophesied centuries before. Somebody on his inner circle would have to betray him. It's all part of the plan. In other words, God is still sovereign. When you think you fail, when you think you make a mistake, when you think it's a big, bad situation, sometimes, most of the time, it's a setup because God's still on the throne. He's still in charge. Although he may not be in control because he's given you the keys to the Rolls Royce. You're the one driving it. He's still the manufacturer of that Rolls Royce. He's still in charge, and he's got a bigger plan in every mistake that you make. It's a good news gospel. One of you is a devil. And then verse 71, he was speaking of Judas. Everyone say Judas. And then say to yourself, am I a Judas? No, don't say that. He was speaking of Judas. These are the names you don't want to name your kids. Like Jezebel, Judas, Absalom. Anyways, son of Simon Iscariot, one of the 12 who would later betray him. You're taking notes, write this down. I want to talk really briefly about the offense of opportunity. In light of this whole series about really the gospel being an offense, the offense of opportunity. There is an opportunity in every offense, but there's also an offense in every opportunity. Jesus came on the scene to present a new opportunity to come a little closer, to come in a little deeper. But there was an offense in this opportunity because the things that Jesus was saying, people couldn't look past. They couldn't see with spiritual eyes, and so they got locked up in the words and the semantics and the things that he said and couldn't see the heart, couldn't see what he was trying to say because they were spiritually blind. And so I want to give you the 6-step journey really quickly, the 6-step journey if we can, in the process that we go through in offense. Can we do this? You don't want to take notes, okay? I got 6 steps for 20 minutes, okay? So this is going to be hard, but it's Pentecost, so we might got to wait here for 10 days. Let me get through the whole thing, okay? I want to give you some keys that we go through, and they're not really actually keys. It's more really, learning to become aware of the process of staying trapped in offense. Because like I said, an offense can either trap you in it, or it can train you through it. But I want to give you the 6-step journey of what happens where we get trapped in it, and sort of the step process to get there. And so, number 1, if you're taking notes, write this down. Write this down. There's the quiet grumble. Say it with me, the quiet grumble. And I'm gonna bring you along a little bit of a scriptural journey in this one passage specifically. Let's go to John 6, verse 41. After Jesus had been saying this stuff, he'd said, like, I am the true bread of heaven. He actually said some other statements like, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you have no part with me. It's a very offensive statement. And everybody's mind went to cannibalism. Everyone's mind went to, it's an abomination according to Leviticus. Everyone's mind went to this, like, this is not right. This is not right. Like, Anthony Hopkins is not here right now. Remember the movie Cannibal? Anybody? No. Anyways. So everybody was offended by this statement, unless you eat my flesh. What he was saying, unless you truly believe with all of your heart that I am the one sent from heaven to be all the provision you need as the bread of life, you have no part with me. Some of the Jews in verse 41 said this. Some of the Jews, let's call them the outsiders at this point. They weren't on the inner circle, okay, with Jesus. These were the people that Jesus was teaching, Jews that represented themselves in the synagogue as he was teaching. Some of the Jews began to grumble quietly against him because he said, I am the bread that came down from heaven. That's where offense begins, is the grumbling quietly. Grumbling quietly. You know, when your boss offends you at work, you go to your coworker and you're like, oh, I can't believe it. Like, he's just a horrible boss. Like, I just can't believe it. Do you know what he did last summer? Do you know what he did? Do you know what he's doing right now? Do you know about him? And start grumbling. Anybody ever experienced that? Come on, we've all been victims of it. We've all done it at some level. I've done it. We've all done it. You know, when your boss changes at work, your manager changes, something happens, new opportunity comes to play in our life, new promotion, and we don't like the way things are going, and we start grumbling quietly, not to necessarily the source that can actually deal with it, but with each other, thinking that it will just pass. They begin to grumble quietly. Let's look at this word for a second. This word for grumble or to complain. In some scriptures it would say complain with each other. It means to murmur or mutter. It means a muffled undertone. I love it. I love it. It's related to the sound of cooing doves. You ever heard a cooing dove before? I can't. That was pretty good though. It's pretty good. Yeah, it might sound soothing, right? But do you know what a cooing dove? Why the dove is cooing? It's actually not the mating call. It's not the luring in. It's time to mate, mating season call. The cooing of a dove is when they are confronting or challenging a perceived threat. They do it quietly. And others start doing it with them. They're all just in the same space together. It's the beginning of when you start to get trapped in offense, is when you start quietly. And it might seem okay and it might seem spiritual, but eventually it's got to be dealt with or it will trap you. It will take you out. Let's see what they were grumbling about. Verse 32 of chapter 6. Walk with me here. Jesus said, I tell you the truth, Moses didn't give you bread from heaven, my father. What an offense. Because you see, the Jewish people in the wilderness, like Moses, like he initiated all this stuff. Let me just tell you, let me awaken you to truth right now. Moses didn't do jack squat for you. He led you, but it was God who provided the manna for you. And a whole generation died. Do you know why they died in the wilderness? Because they grumbled. They murmured. They were like, every day. And eventually God's like, hey guys, listen. You came out of Egypt. The whole purpose of transition in wilderness was to get Egypt out of you. But because you're not letting me take it out of you, you're actually going to die in the wilderness. I got to start all over again. Man, I don't want to be that guy. Please, I don't want to be that guy. Because sometimes I'm in my prayer closet and I'm complaining to God. Why is it this way? What's going on? Why does it feel like always like this? Why? And God's like, hey, Shawn, remember what you say all the time about I don't answer the why? I want you to know what I'm doing in you in the process. Because the battle is never about the outside. It's always about the inside. Because the battles on the outside are always won on the inside first. So I had to kill off a whole generation in the wilderness because they were cooing like doves. Cooing like doves. It says here, Moses didn't give you bread from heaven, my Father did, and now he offers you the true bread from heaven. Verse 33, the true bread of God is the one who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. Verse 34, sir, they said, give us that bread every day. In other words, they're not getting it. They're just not getting it, right? They're seeing through a glass dimly. It's very foggy. They can't see. The windshield wipers are not working. They're hearing something, but they're not seeing what God is trying to say. That's how offense begins to work its way into our life, right? It traps our mindset so we can see things in a foggy way. And so we hear it, but we can't really understand it. Because hearing is one thing and understanding is another thing, right? We had some couples over at our house on Friday night. We were asking them some questions about their marriage, and it came for our turn to talk about our marriage. And my wife said, we were talking about what's the biggest challenge, and Michelle said, and I'm just bringing you into my vulnerable failures as a husband right now, so you can judge me later. And Michelle said that sometimes when I think it's really sometimes. She didn't use the word sometimes. She should have used the word sometimes, and it's not always, right? That when I listen to her, I'm not really hearing her, right? Any men? Can we give like an air prop? Yeah. You listen, but you're not really hearing. I actually feel that way sometimes too, but whatever. You're listening, but you're not really hearing. Well, this is what was happening. They were listening, but they weren't hearing with their heart, so they could create the effective response that would change the situation. Are you here? Are you hearing me? Okay, you need to respond. Are you hearing me? Verse 35, Jesus replied, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry again. Whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. But you haven't believed in me, even though you have seen me. However, those the Father has given me will come to me, and I will never reject them. For I have come down from heaven to do the will of God who sent me, not to do my own will. And after this, post this statement, they started to grumble quietly. They just couldn't handle it. Why? Because they couldn't understand what he was saying. They were offended at the statement. We can get our eyes so much sometimes on the tone, on the semantics, on the wording of a statement, that we actually get off in our ability to interpret the situation. You hearing what I'm saying? This is what was happening in this situation. Number 2, write this down. Running behind you. You guys okay? Come on. The horizontal questioning. It goes from the grumble, quietly complaining, to the horizontal questioning. This takes place way too often with those usually on the perimeter. They're not always on the inside, but they're close, they're proximity, because this is what was happening in chapter 6. It's like, I want to say this, use the church as an example. There's always seasons where people come up to me and be like, and every pastor, it's funny, every pastor I talk to has the exact same experience with the exact same words. Someone comes up to you and says, you know what, Shawn, people are saying. I have heard this like thousands of times from people, pastors that are talking. It's the same way they say it too. People are saying, which they mean is like five disgruntled people are saying. Like five, like a minority are saying. Because usually it isn't the majority, it's five. And that's fine. There's always a minority of people that aren't happy with something, right? Yeah. But it's very easy. And so those people are saying, and it's like there's this horizontal questioning going on. This was happening in chapter 6 of verse 52. It says they were disputing and questioning. Listen to what it says. It says the low whispers. Everyone say low whispers. Of some of Jesus's detractors turned into an out-and-out debate. The crowd said, what is he talking about? How is he able to give us his flesh to eat? So it went from a quiet grumbling to a horizontal debate, horizontal questioning, horizontal intense arguing. The word argue here is to engage in battle. It means to fight. It means to strive. It means to quarrel. The actual verb means to war. It means to war. There was an all-out now war in this moment by the statement that Jesus made. By one statement that he made. It was an all-out war. But that war didn't go to Jesus saying, help us understand it. They're just like, oh, did you hear what he said? Oh my gosh, I'm so offended right now. Oh my gosh. And their mindset was trapped in the fact that he said, unless you eat my flesh, unless you drink my blood, you have no part with me. Instead of pursuing me for context to help yourself understand, you just went and complained with each other. Second trap that we get trapped in when it comes to an offense. You with me? This number 3, I'm gonna skip through some stuff just for time. Number 3, write this down. Number 3, the great misunderstanding. We go from the grumbling quietly to the, forget my last point now. Horizontal questioning, thank you. Some other people are listening. The great misunderstanding. The great misunderstanding. Misinterpretation. Misinterpretation is everything. How many have ever been in a situation where you've misinterpreted something that someone said? We all have, right? It's very easy through a text to misinterpret, through an email, through a phone call, and even a face-to-face. You can misinterpret someone's heart. You can misinterpret a statement. You can misinterpret, this and that, and I have to deal with that a lot because I have the privilege of speaking on the mic. I have the mic, but then I also have to deal with the fact that there will be people that will misinterpret what I say. There'll be people that will misinterpret. They'll misunderstand what I say. They'll take it in a wrong context. They'll hear it wrong. And I can always improve in my communication, but there's a reality that's at play that I just can't get into everybody's head and answer their questions that are in their head exactly how they need to be answered so that they don't get misunderstood. They don't misunderstand what I'm saying or misinterpret. That's a really hard thing to live by. You will always misunderstand at some level. At some level. And they misunderstood what he was saying. Once again, John 6:56, anyone who eats my flesh and drinks my blood remains in me, and I in him. I live because of the living Father who sent me. In the same way, anyone who feeds on me will live because of me. I am the true bread that came down from heaven. Anyone who eats this bread will not die as your ancestors did, even though they ate the manna, but will live forever. He said these things while he was teaching in the synagogue. Verse 60, when many of his disciples heard this, they said, this is a difficult and harsh, offensive statement. That word difficult means stern. It means violent. It means hard and harsh. It was a difficult statement for them to understand. So this context, it went from the Jewish people, the outsiders, grumbling quietly, still to the outsiders having arguments, now to the inner circle of his crew that just couldn't get it. Now we don't get it. Like they didn't get it. We were tracking with you until that point, but now we don't get it. This is like too hard. Like, what do you mean I gotta eat you, man? I gotta drink you. Like, I just don't get it. But he goes on to explain himself. They shut off their heart. It's funny because anybody ever been into a conversation where you're leading them on a journey in communication and they get stuck on the one thing and you're about to give context for that one thing, But because they get stuck there, they can't hear the next thing to give it context, right? So they're stuck on that one thing, and they can't just, you gotta let Jesus explain it to you. Let the process play out so you don't get trapped in this difficult, harsh, offensive statement. Verse 60, like I said, who can listen to it? This is a difficult and harsh, offensive statement. Who can be expected to listen to it? Number 4, the next thing that happens. Are you okay? Are you tracking with me here? Are you getting something from this? I hope you are. The heart exposure is the next channel, the next part of the journey, the next step, the heart exposure. The heart exposure, not just, now there's been an offense. Now they're having a hard time handling what is being said. Now it's like, when we read the scripture and Jesus, says to do this and to do that, and it's hard for us to understand. And then when we realize we can't understand it and we're offended by it, all of a sudden now our heart is exposed, because God will often allow offense to come to your mind to reveal the heart of an individual. Things will happen in your life that will bother your rationale, that will bother your logic, so that the heart posture can be revealed within you. Because God has always been about the inside, not about the outside. When he can get the inside right, everything on the outside will follow. Out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth will speak. If you can get the inside right, everything you do that affects the outside will be healthy. Okay? You tracking with me? So they're offended. They can't handle this. It's offensive, but now all of a sudden, their heart is exposed. And the real genuineness of their heart is exposed. And I want to keep bringing this back to marriage, to relationships, to work relationships. It just takes one little offense in the mind that we can't move through or move past to really show where the heart is at. Because how many know that when you're offended, you say stuff you don't mean, right? But sometimes when you say stuff that you don't mean, it just shows a little bit of a reflection of where the heart is at. It exposes the deepest places of the heart. And that's hard to deal with sometimes. I've said some things that I don't mean, said some things that when I was offended or hurt that I didn't mean, and then realized, man, like maybe my heart was a little bit off in that area. Anybody with me? John 6, verse 61, Jesus was aware that his disciples were complaining. So he said to them, does this offend you? What will you think of the Son of Man ascends to heaven again then? The Spirit alone gives eternal life. Human effort accomplishes nothing. And the very words I have spoken to you are spirit and life. Verse 64. Listen to this. This is where the heart's exposed. But some of you do not believe me. So now let's get to the deeper issue. That's what he's saying. I see that you can't listen to what I'm saying. You can't get past what I've just said. It's offending your mind. And this is revealing the genuineness of your faith. It's revealing really how solid you are on the inside. Man, we need to pray that Jesus offends us every day. We need to pray that our opportunities in life offend us. The new job promotion you got at work, that you have opportunities to be offended every day by people, because it's in offense that you are trained through it if you let yourself, and if you can get trained through it, the heart on the inside becomes stronger. The genuineness of your faith becomes stronger, because the only way you get stronger on the inside is if you have outside forces against, pushing you back, trying to stop the inside from getting stronger. And it's only under pressure that the inside gets stronger. Are you hearing what I'm saying? The heart exposed is so good. We need to pray every day. God, I want my heart to be exposed. I want my motives to be exposed, because if this is strong, everything out here I touch is stronger. Yeah. Verse 64 in the Voice translation says, but some of you do not believe. From the first day Jesus began to call disciples, he knew those who did not have genuine faith. He knew too who would betray him. This blows my mind. This blows my mind. This is like such a deep revelation, in that there are people and there are mistakes that we make. There are failures that we will experience in life. And yes, some of them are just made because of dumb decisions. I understand that. But there's something about sometimes in our spiritual walk where we actually will do things that will feel like failure just to bring a heart exposure on the inside. That God has a bigger plan. I've done stuff, I've assigned stuff to certain individuals and believed with all my heart that, you know, they were the ones. I remember 5 years ago, this happened, and I really believed this person was the one, and it just didn't end very well. You know, and I look back and I realize how perfect that was. It changed my life. God was in it. It had to end that way. This might be challenging to your theology or your way of thinking, but it had to be that way. The spiritual life is not going to look like and feel like perfection. The spiritual life, if you're called, is going to be messy. It's going to smell. It's going to hurt. It's going to be painful. But some of those most painful things, I'm not talking about sin. I'm not talking about sickness here. Don't hear that God does not put sickness on you to teach you anything. That's a bad father. Go jump in traffic so I can heal you. It's not a good father. But God will allow us to do things in our life because we are the ones in control, not God. God is in charge. He's not in control. He gave you the keys. If he was in control, Adam and Eve would have never messed it up for all of us. Okay? There is no argument there. He is not in control. He's given us the keys to his Bentley. We're driving it around. We crash the car. We make dumb decisions. But God is so redemptive and restorative, and he's a reconciling God. Even when we wreck the car, he somehow speaks to a mechanic and says, listen, I want you to bless that guy and repair that car for him for free. Somehow it just works out. The heart needs to be exposed. I love it. When I look back, hindsight's 2020, I look back and I see how my heart was exposed and how in times I almost wanted to give up and quit, and I see how I did that. Wait a minute, I did that, and look how it ended. Is something wrong with me? Not necessarily. Something is wrong with me. I will make mistakes, but not necessarily everything that happens is my fault. Nothing was wrong with Jesus, and he appointed a betrayer. Nothing was wrong with God, who created Adam and Eve in perfection, and they rejected him. Was something wrong with God's leadership? God created Adam and Eve, perfection, gave them the keys. They made a decision to be independent from his plan. God's not up there, man, like I was a failure at producing Adam and Eve. No, I gave free will to mankind. Jesus, I mean, it's like having a church split. Jesus had multiple church splits. Like, read John 6. They abandoned him. In fact, his whole church was disbanded when he died. They all went back to their old ways, forgot about 3 years of investment. They threw their stock in the trash. 3 years. And then he comes back to life. You know, it's funny because this is where reconciliation happens, restoration happens. He comes back to life. Day 1 of 40, resurrected man. And now people realize everything you said was true, and it's all coming to pass right now. Reconciliation happens. And God's so graceful, he just opened his arms again and go, Peter, even though you denied me 3 times, and you were like my right-hand guy, it's all good, man, come back in. Judas, I mean, you're dead now, I still love you. But everybody else who went back to their old ways, I'm welcoming you back. And Thomas, you're still doubting, and I'm here in front of you, and you got to put your finger in the holes on my hands to still prove it to you. But hey, man, I still love you anyways, even though you're a doubting Thomas. My grace is sufficient, even in your weakness. I'm so good. But it took you seeing it before your eyes, the evidence of the promise, before you came back to your senses. The heart had to go through some deep exposure before everything changed. His whole church fell apart. Peter cut off somebody's ear. It'd be like one of you guys physically abusing somebody and like cutting off someone's hand. And headlines read, disciple of kingdom culture cuts off the hand of neighbor in a dispute over church seating. Peter did it. And yet Jesus is like, it's all good, bro. Let me just put that back for you. Pops the ear back on the head. Number 5, then we have, after the exposure, we have the great falling away, and I'm backtracking a little bit. In John 6, verse 66, everyone say 6, 6, 6. John 6, verse 66 says here, as a result of this, many of his disciples abandoned him and no longer walked with him. This is way before he died. So he's having people like come and go all the time. Come and go all the time. Is something wrong with Jesus? No. Doesn't excuse our growth as people in life. You may be a manager, you might have stuff going on right now in your staff, leadership, whatever. Maybe you're in a good season, maybe you're in a hard season. Don't blame yourself for other people's decisions. Be aware, self-analyze, take a personal inventory of how you can improve, but don't live under the condemnation of somebody else's bad decisions. Parents in the house, don't live under condemnation for your child's bad decision. Because that seed that you planted years ago will come back and will produce fruit. Because God's word doesn't go void. Don't give up. Don't quit. Keep believing. Don't blame yourself. Don't condemn yourself. Don't let the enemy have a heyday on your mind. Because it happened to Jesus. I love how it says in the Passion Translation 67, verse 67. So Jesus said to his 12, and you, do you also want to leave? So a little bit of the outside disciples, some of the outside disciples, not the 12, decided to abandon him, reject him. And he's like, guys, do you want to leave? Like, this is hard, but if you can journey with me through this process, I can help you understand what I'm saying. But here's an option. You can take an opt-out if you want to. But verse 6, or number 6, write this down. The best part of this story is that God always has a bigger plan with offense. There is always a bigger plan. The opportunity that comes as a result of every offense, and the offense within every opportunity, ultimately God has a bigger plan. Even though Jesus chose what he called a devil, and the word is adversary, an accuser. Even though Jesus chose a devil, even though Jesus knew when he picked the disciples who was going to betray him, who was going to abandon him, he knew from the beginning, from the end, which honestly is harder than not knowing at all. If you knew what was going to happen that far out before it happened, you probably wouldn't do anything at all. But Jesus knew the beginning from the end, and he still, out of love, chose these guys. Because God has a bigger plan. I said this earlier. Failures have a way of forging the path for the next promotion. Failures have a way of forging the path for the next promotion. What looked like failure in Jesus' team, in Jesus' right-hand guy, was actually the very thing that promoted him to the cross, which allowed him to die on the cross willingly as a one-time sacrifice, so all of us can be reconciled back to the one who created us. It's scandalous news. Don't get too happy. It's so exciting. John 6, verse 70. I'm going to close with this, and then I'm done. The last 2 verses of this passage. Then Jesus shocked them with these words. I have handpicked you to be my 12, knowing that one of you is a devil. That's how good I am. Jesus was referring to Judas Iscariot, son of Simon, for he knew that Judas, one of his chosen disciples, was getting ready to betray him. In these last 2 verses, I believe really shows the sovereignty of God. That even though I knew what was going to happen, I still chose to do it this way. To fulfill prophecy, it had to happen this way. In other words, you guys, you can do all that you want. You can be the best person in the world you want. You can be, all that you believe you can be. You can be the best businessman, and you can do all the most amazing things in life, and have all the most amazing promotions in life, and the biggest platforms in life. But in the end, if God is not in it, it will not be true success. And will have no long-lasting effect. Because there's still an aspect of God where he's sovereign over all. He's sovereign over all. He was sovereign over this situation. Sovereignty is, the definition of sovereignty is God can do what he wants when he wants because he's God. Psalms 115, I do what I please. I don't need your permission. That's what sovereignty is. I'll do it despite what you do. We don't live from the place of sovereignty in the sense that our whole spiritual life is just waiting for God to do what he's going to do when he wants to do it, because we have a part to play. But God, even in our part, is still sovereign. He's still God on the throne. He's still in charge. He's got a bigger plan. I want you to stand up with me as we close. I really believe this today, that it might be a little bit of a heavy message. I don't know. I just know that God's been speaking this to me for the last 3 weeks, connecting it through the gospel, connecting it through this whole idea of this scandalous message that everything that Jesus is, it is an offense to our order, our systems in our mind, our analytical nature, our logical side. Everything that God is, everything that Jesus is represented is an offense to those systems we've established in our mind. It's an offense. It's an offense to our marriage. It's an offense to our relationships. And man, we can either be trapped in it or trained through it by perceiving right. Because if we can perceive right, we can believe right. And if we can believe right, we'll receive everything that Jesus wants to give us. Just close your eyes just for a second and lift your hands right now. I just feel, I just want to pray and lift off burdens off of us right now. Lift off burdens. I don't know how this applies to you today. Maybe it applies to you because in your job right now, you're currently dealing with some major opportunity. And that opportunity has brought up some offenses in your life. Maybe you feel like you're self-condemned. You feel like you're blaming yourself for problems that maybe aren't even your problems. Maybe they are your problems. You need to work through them. I don't know the situation for you, but maybe there's just an offense, and maybe you feel like you've been trapped in it, and you've been looking at things from the wrong perspective, the wrong vantage point. My prayer for you today is that that vantage point would change, that you would see it differently. In Jesus' name. Come on, just if you feel comfortable, lift your hands in a posture of receiving right now. I pray, God, for every person in here that's in a state. Maybe you're the one that started to grumble quietly. Maybe you're the one where your heart is exposed now. And God, actually, it's a good thing your heart is exposed, because once your heart is exposed, really it's the first step to change and transformation. Because if God can get into your heart, he can change your life. And so, Jesus, I pray for everybody in this room represented here this morning, that there would be an encounter of your grace to overcome and be trained through any offense, anything that's going on right now that may be holding them down, holding them back. Maybe they need to forgive their spouse. Maybe they need to forgive themselves. Maybe they need to forgive a friend, a person in their life, a manager, a boss, or whatever it may be, a father, a mother, a family member. Whatever the case may be, God, I pray that you would have your way in their heart, you'd have their way in their mind, you'd have their way in their body, you'd have your way, and not let them stay trapped in it, but let them be trained through it, in Jesus' name. Thank you, Jesus, that you are